Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra is currently the best that Samsung has to offer, and it starts at around $1,200 and in some regions even more than that. So I thought, how does it compare to Galaxy A34? This is a lower mid-range phone from Samsung that starts at around $250 to $300. You can actually get 4 of these phones for the price of one S23 Ultra. So is that price difference really justifiable? Is this phone actually 4 times better than this one? Yes, it is. I'm just kidding. Okay, first, when it comes to the design, they're kind of similar. Now, build materials are not the same. The S23 Ultra comes with Gorilla Glass Victus 2, while you're stuck with a much older version, Gorilla Glass 5, on the A34. And that just means it's a bit more prone to scratches and breaks and stuff like that. S23 Ultra has an aluminum frame and a matte glass back, while the A34 is actually all plastic. Sides and the back of the phone are made of the same material. The reason I said the design is similar because they actually look alike. They have a very uniform design perspective that follows their whole lineup and kind of connects it in a way. So aesthetically, I guess they are quite similar. The size difference is not that huge. Ultra has a 6.8-inch display as opposed to the 6.6-inch display on the A34. They're not that far apart. S23 Ultra has a higher resolution display with a much higher pixel density, but they are both pretty bright. That's 1000 nits on the A34 versus 1200 on the Ultra. The bigger difference is that Ultra actually peaks at 1750 nits. So for example, if you're outside under direct sunlight, the Ultra can actually reach a much higher brightness for a short period of time. But in my opinion, they are both bright enough. Another thing these displays have in common is the 120Hz refresh rate, which I'm really glad that Samsung decided to include in their lower mid-range model. The fact that you can get a phone for $250 or $300 and have a high refresh rate screen, the one that the iPhone 15 actually doesn't have, is a huge plus. So even though the displays are of course not the same, it's really not that big of a difference, and the display on the A34 is actually quite good for the price. Also, both of these phones have big batteries and as a result of that, great battery life. Now the S23 Ultra really is top of the line when it comes to battery, actually one of the best Android phones at least when it comes to battery life. But the A34 is definitely no slouch. You actually get really decent battery life with this one as well. Both phones can get me through the day with no problems. Now unfortunately, the A34 doesn't support wireless charging, and wired charging is capped at 25 watts, while the S23 Ultra can charge up to 45 watts wired and supports both wireless and reverse wireless charging. They both come with Android 13 and One UI 5 out of the box, but the S23 Ultra is actually upgradable to Android 14 with One UI 6 as of just a few weeks ago, while the A34, for now, you're stuck with Android 13. And the last, let's say, similarity between these two phones is the under-display fingerprint sensor. And they both are under-display, but S23 Ultra has an ultrasonic fingerprint sensor that is just much faster and much more reliable compared to the optical sensor on the A34. It's just a bit less reliable, but it's not something that you will notice too much in my opinion. Another thing that kind of separates these sensors is their location on the screen, because the S23 Ultras is a bit higher up on the screen, and at least for me it's much easier to reach, but they actually both do a good job of unlocking your phone, so we're not gonna nitpick here. Alright, performance. So the S23 Ultra is a flagship phone, and therefore it has a flagship chip in it. And that is the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which is like one of the leading chips on Android devices currently. While the A34 has a mid-range chip. And what does that mean? It means that the Ultra is much faster and much snappier. Is the A34 unusable? Absolutely not. Especially if you're like a moderate user and you're used to using your phone for like social media, responding to emails, maybe using the camera a bit, stuff like that. This chip is more than enough. But if you do want the best of the best, then the Ultra is definitely a way to go, because this chip is visibly much faster. There's absolutely no lag, no stutter whatsoever, and more importantly, it's gonna stay fast for a longer period of time. Now the A34 chip is still actually pretty decent. There's not a lot of stutters, not a lot of lag. But for example, if you like gaming on your phone, the Ultra can play virtually any game out there on like really high settings. So if that's something that you're interested in, it's worth considering. Hydration is important. And now we get to one of the most important parts of this video, in my opinion, which is the cameras. If you're someone that just wants to take a casual photo or video every now and then of like your family, friends, stuff like that, the A34 is definitely fine. But if you again want the best of the best, the S23 Ultra's camera is absolutely amazing. You get the main camera, the 200 megapixel f1.7, 2 telephoto cameras with a 3 and a 10x optical zoom, as well as an ultra wide. The Ultra is definitely one of the leading devices currently when it comes to the camera. So if you do want the best of the best, this is definitely a better choice. It has amazing dynamic range. image detail, colors, basically everything that you ever want with a phone. And it does record video up to 8K, which in my opinion is a bit of an overkill still, but it does exist. Great autofocus, stabilization, night mode, basically everything that you can ever ask for in a smartphone camera is on this phone. And of course it has a bigger sensor that lets in much more light and everything. But what's in my opinion actually even more important than the camera sensor itself is what they can do on the software side of things. All smartphone cameras, even the best ones, actually do have a much smaller sensor than something like a DSLR or a professional mirrorless camera, stuff like that, because there's just not enough room for a bigger sensor on these devices. So even though the sensor does make a difference to some extent, the way these smartphone companies make up for the lack of space is by using a lot of software, AI, machine learning and stuff like that to kind of make these photos better after you've taken them. And what's needed for these software improvements in camera is a good chip. And since the S23 Ultra has one of the best chips on the market right now, it does that in a much better way than the A34. But like I said, the A34 camera is still just fine if you're a casual user. This one is still gonna be more than fine for you. Now, aside from all these things that we mentioned so far, the S23 Ultra does have some additional like small quality of life improvements compared to the A34. Like the haptic motor on this phone is much better, so the vibration is, in my opinion, much smoother. Speakers are louder and more clear. Everything is just sort of stitched together a bit more, and it functions better in Unity to give you a better user experience day to day. That's not something that I can like easily describe to you, but just holding the phone in hand and just swiping left and right somehow feels different on these phones. Plus, the S Pen. Now, all that being said, is the A34 a bad phone? Absolutely not. Is it worse in every way than the S23 Ultra? Yeah, kinda. But the A34 is over $900 cheaper, and they more or less do the same thing. Now, the Ultra does most of these things a bit better, but you can actually get around with using the A34 day to day, no problem. If you're a casual user, you use your phone for social media, communication, catching up with your friends and family, and just kinda snapping a few photos and videos here and there, the A34 is, in my opinion, a great choice. But if you want the best of the best and you are a heavy user, especially if you're using it a bit more professionally in a work setting, stuff like that, then the S23 Ultra is a much better choice for that small niche number of people that are like huge fans of technology and they're using their phones a lot every day for various different tasks. I can absolutely justify the price difference for the Ultra. And it's actually one of my favorite Android devices, period. But you're gonna have to decide which one is better for you. Now, while you're in the process of deciding that, you might wanna like the video, subscribe to the channel, do all that YouTube stuff. And while you're there, you can also click on this video right up here